was born in Qingshan Village, a poor county in Guangxi, China. Like its name, the whole village is hidden in a mountain, and most of it is the beaten path. Before I was 10 years old, the farthest place I ever visited was the county seat. From the village to the town, there is only a small road with few vehicles. Our village is right next to the highway, and it is a village with a superior geographical position. When I was a child, I used to hear from my elders that deeper in the mountain there were still smaller villages where people could not get enough to eat. My family has enough to eat, so I don't think there's anything wrong with life. Qingshan Primary School, where I am studying, is located on the mountainside, and there are not many students. There is only one class in a grade, with only 5 or 6 students and at most a dozen children. There are only a few teachers, most of whom are substitute teachers. Before 2004, when compulsory education was not widely available here, many parents felt it was wasting money to send their children to attend school. The transportation in the mountains is inconvenient and the distance between villages is far away, and getting children to study means spending hours on the road every day. More importantly, farm work can make enough to eat, and going to school takes time and money, and there is no immediate effect. At that time, most of the highly educated people who had attended junior high school or high school in our village still stayed in the countryside. Especially for girls, only marry well is the only way out. Fortunately, I caught up with compulsory education. At Qingshan Primary School, I met the first sisters in my life. In the summer of 2004, when I was 6 years old, I followed my sisters who was 4 years older than me and walked the mountain road for nearly an hour. We went to the school together and entered the preschool class. The school has 3 teaching buildings, 2 adobe buildings with sloping roofs and tiled roofs, and a new mathematics building, 3 stories high and with locked doors. That year, the number of the preschool class was extremely large, with 15 students. The only university graduate Shaoan teacher in our school was our class teacher. On the first day of enrollment, Teacher Shaoan was handing out textbooks to us. The classroom glass next to Hushan was smashed. Soon, small stones fell into the classroom through the open window successively, falling to the ground and books. Some stones almost smash people. I looked out of the window and saw a tall, thin girl throwing stones. Shaoan teacher shouted to the window too, "We are in class, let's go." The girl heard and felt frightened. She ran away along the edge of the forest in the back mountain. Everyone was curious about who the person was. The teacher Shaoan didn't explain it, and some students said, "It must be a wild man in the mountains. That is Chunzi. Don't you know Chunzi? It's that Chunzi." A female classmate spoke suddenly. Her name was Lizzie, with dark skin and a sharp voice, a small of body. I know, the lunatics in your village." "Ha ha ha." She laughed. Some students answered, the whole class burst into laughter. I didn't know Chunzi, go home to ask Grandma, but Grandma sighed, and saying that like Lizzie, Chunzi is also a poor child. Later, Chunzi came many times, either throwing stones or garbage at us at school, or crouching outside to stare at us secretly through the window for class. As long as she didn't disturb the class and hurt her classmates, the teacher wouldn't drive out him. Chunzi was 12 years old that year, and there was a younger brother in Qingshan Elementary School, lower than my elder sister a grade. Chunzi's mother died when she was very young, and her father bring up 2 children by farming and doing odd jobs occasionally. Their house was just a few minutes' walk from Aoyama Primary School, 2 unfurnished dirt houses. When she entered school at the right age, compulsory education has not been popularized in the mountains. It is not strange for girls not to go to school. So she worked with her father and worked odd jobs when she was a child. She likes to go to the back of the school when she is not working, watching others have lessons. Lizzie, who was the same age as me, was more fortunate than Chunzi. Although her family was also poor, she caught up with the popularity of compulsory education and was able to enter school. Lizzie is a rare only daughter in the mountains. Her mother divorced her father when she was pregnant. The mother's family members did not want to ask for a girl, so they threw her into the vacant lot near their home. When Lizzie's grandmother knew it, she hurried to bring her back. Lizzie's father had no culture and was idle on weekdays, so extremely poor, guarding several adobe rooms left by ancestors, and doing only the work that could barely feed enough work. Lizzie was malnourished and was thinner than us. The classmates gave her the nickname dwarf. In any case, it is useless for a girl to go to school. In the eyes of the mountain people, it is enough to raise a girl and marry her off and take back the dowry line. In the second year, we all advanced to the first grade. The school issued new textbooks, and also specifically told parents, compulsory education does not need to pay tuition and book fees. The young children have little strength and can't do any farm work. Send the children to school. Discipline is also a good choice for parents. This finally allows most students in the class to continue to school. The principal also persuaded Chunzi's father with the same words. In this way, 13-year-old Chunzi became our classmates. On the first day of school, Chunzi was sitting alone in the last row of the classroom, rickety, with dirty hair tied into a ponytail, wearing a man's black short-sleeved shirt, a pair of short pants, and wear a pair of cheap plastic sandals that were the most popular at that time. The reason why I can remember so clearly is that she has always been dressed like this for the next few years. When the classmates saw her, they stopped and looked at the door or squinted on the window glass. Chunzi seems to be able to feel everyone's eyes, and has been biting her lips, twisting her hands together. Until Xiao and teacher came in and said to us, "Student Chunzi will be a member of our class in the future, we should need to get good along well." The class burst into a pot, and we talk a lot of discussion. From time to time, everyone looked back at two eyes of Chuanzi and saw that Chunzi looked up again and immediately turned around. Looking back now, when people didn't welcome her at that time, it come form more of a fear. She is a savage adult. And she, unlike us, we didn't take her to games, and we didn't go with her after school. They did everything they could to isolate her, but Chunzi ignored us. She often sat in the last row reading books silently, or stood alone in the hallway watching us play games. This situation lasted for a year. After the persuasion of Xiaoan finally began to have classmates and Chunzi started talking. Perhaps the children's mind is also very simple. Someone said, Chunzi doesn't seem to be a savage and her home is a little further down the road from the school. Others said, I've seen her dad, like her. Someone added, she is quite fun, not fierce to us. In this way, Chunzi is finally not a stranger in the class. And the beginning of my friendship with Chunzi will be another year later. In the second half of the second grade, teacher Xiao didn't receive Chunzi's homework several times in a row. He finally got angry and let the Chunzi to stand up in the classroom and asked, why did you bring homework to school to write? Chunzi, who is almost as tall as teacher Xiaoan, lowered her head and kept silent. Xiaoan teacher asked, can't you do your homework at home? Everyone looked at Chunzi. Do not know how long in the past, Chunzi finally squeezed out a word from the mouth, there is no table at home and I need to do housework after school. Everyone, including teacher Xiaoen, didn't expect this answer. Yes, in her father's eyes, helping the family to share the pressure is her priority. Xiaoen teacher let her sit down, gently said, "You can hand in your homework for late." Then he asked, "Who else has no table at home? Raise your hand." No one in the class raised their hands. I think the dining table in my home, which has been used for decades, should be called my desk. Because of this, some naughty classmates began to discuss whose family had the worst conditions. In the past few years, the gap between the rich and the poor in the surrounding villages was not large. The richest families just lived in cement houses and can use electric appliances. The poorest were still burning firewood in adobe houses. At that time, I had no concept of poverty. Until I heard someone say, "Her kitchen is dark and burns wood, so she is so dark." You can see that she still carries her sister's old school bag. Someone added in more detail, "The kitchen has earth walls, black on all sides, and the table is black. Her grandfather wears no trousers, always wears boxer shorts, and goes out to play. Her mother also ran." Then came the unbridled laughter. Yeah, they're talking about my home. I remember very clearly, they didn't to consider of me that day, and talk loud about my family all the time. I froze in the corridor, and Lizzie stood at the back door of the classroom looking at me, looking like want to talk with me. Suddenly, Chun-Zi, who was originally sitting in the classroom, rushed out, scolding at the boys. As soon as the boys dispersed, Chun-Zi turned around and said to me some words that I still remember, "You don't pay attention to them, whatever they say." I nodded. Of course, I can only allow them to talk, because they were telling the truth. After this incident, I, Lizzie and Chun-Zi became good friends. We were all girls without mothers and the poorest children in the class. We started taking turns to play at the other two people's homes. The first to go is the Lizzie's house, which is also an adobe house. There is a round table in the kitchen, and the rice porridge is common in the pot. Lizzie's grandmother is a kind old man who took out bowl to entertain us. With simple pickled cabbage, I drank a bowl of porridge. Chun-Zi was so cautious that she also only drank a bowl of porridge. Lizzie's grandma looked at Chun-Zi and said, "You are a big child, it's not enough to eat a bowl of porridge." Chun-Zi wrung his fingers and shook his head, "I can't to eat, and I'm full." After leaving Lizzie's home, Lizzie asked Chun-Zi, "My grandma is very good, why don't you eat a bowl more?" Chun-Zi didn't speak, walked in front of us too. Later, I learned that at that time, Chun-Zi suffered much more discrimination in the village than the school, so it would be more nervous to face the same villagers like Grandma Lizzie. We went to Chun-Zi's house again, where the arrangement was incredibly simple, 2 adobe rooms, 1 room with 2 beds next to each other. Chun-Zi said, "I sleep on this bed, my father and my brother on the other bed." The other room was a sitting room and kitchen. That being said, there was nothing in it, not even a stove for the fire. There is only a small black pit on the ground with some firewood in it, and an iron pot were lying on top of it. I cook with it every morning and every night. Chun-Zi said. The last stop is my home. Grandma also asked me to give them a bowl of porridge and match with leftovers. Grandma has been talking, let us 3 good study, early independence, no longer live a poor life. After they left, the grandmother also said, Chun-Zi is so big person still with you to read, and Lizzie is so small. That's pitiful. Now want to come, in addition to rich and poor degree is equal and have an idle father. The only difference between my home and Chun-Zi and Lizzie's home is that my aunt and uncle have left the countryside to get a salary in the town. Grandma always told me at that time that those who worked hard to study and went out always had better lives than those who stayed in the mountains. Later, as a summer vacation, my grandmother took me to the house of my aunt and uncle, so that the different scenes in the county took deeply rooted in my heart. It was during 2 years that the school converted a small classroom into a library. At ordinary times, the library was firmly locked. Every week, Shaoen would take out more than 10 books, most of which were fairy tales, fables and popular science books, and give each of us one. This was the first time I came into contact with a book outside of the textbook. I often stared at an illustration of Beijing in the book, imagining what the capital was like, because teacher Shaoen had never been there, and she couldn't tell us much. At that time, Shaoen teacher wrote a sentence to me: "Life is difficult, origin is not fair, bear the current hardships, and efforts can change the fate." Though I didn't fully understand it at the time, his words were like seeds, which had already sprouted in my heart. In the 3rd grade, a transfer student came to the class, Huang Jiajia, who had come back from the town outside. She always reads by herself and never participates in our games. Unexpectedly, she have through a matter, but became the chunzi to drop out of school fuse. That year, the school came a group of people selling Siku Kwanshu, a thick book, with a hard green paper cover, sold for 40 yuan. The price was equivalent to a month's worth of meat for an average rural family at the time. Teacher Shaoen said, "The book is indeed worth buying. You can discuss it with your family first and tell me tomorrow when you come to school." Unable to bear the children's entreaties, even my home was very poor, Grandma also took out money to let me buy books. At the school the next day, only Lizzie and Chunzi were silent in the class. Everyone knows that they can't get the money, and everyone were too embarrassed to discuss it in front of them. Only Huang Jiajia couldn't understand the situation, and said, "Only they don't buy books, will they stolen it?" Unexpectedly, one morning, Huang Jiajia really said that his book was gone early in the morning, and smashed her bag on the desk, shouting, "Who stole my books?" When no one answered her, she rummaged through the holes in everyone's desks, but finding nothing. She shouted angrily, "I remember, the class only 2 people did not buy the book, who took it? Better hurry back to me, or I tell the teacher." Still no one spoke. Huang Jiajia's threat is not just verbal. That day, teacher Shaoen did not take the class as before, but let us reflect, if anyone steal Huang Jiajia's book, and figure out why he should steal it and don't regret it after taking it. If anyone does know about it, reflect on why they want to protect him. Finally, everyone must write reflection on paper and give it to the teacher. Subsequently, both Lizzie and Chunzi were called to the office. Lizzie came back first, crying on her desk when she came back and said, "I did not steal the book, I am not a thief." Not for a while, Chunzi also came back, her eyes red, in her desk hole rummaging for something. Finally, she took out all the textbooks and exercise books, hold together and walked out of the classroom. She didn't have a school bag, and the pen fell on the corridor while walking. I ran up to pick it up and wanted to give it back to her, but she didn't seem to hear me to shout her. She was still wearing a black men's short sleeves, which were worn out in many places, and her height had grown again, exposing a little belly under her dress and a great part of her calf above the ankle under her trousers. Chunzi never came back this time. I heard that teacher Shaoen had been to her house for several times later, but did not persuade her to come back. For a long time, the discussion about the Sikakwanshu did not stop. Some people said to see Lizzie with a book secretly read, someone said it was the Chunzi holding a book while watching it secretly and put on the vacant lot next to her house, and students of other grades saw it after school. Others said that Huang Jiajia didn't lose her book at all, but she left her book at home. When we were promoted to the 4th grade, Shaoan was transferred away. The school demolished the first row of adobe house classrooms and built a small 2-story building. The building is divided into 2 parts, left as a canteen, contracted to Lizzie's uncle. The right sides will plan to do student dormitory, but the right sides haven't immediately open. Except for a few classmates in this village and nearby villages, we usually bring our own meals to school in the morning. The food is really not delicious. In winter, the food is frozen like ice cubes. In summer, when you open the lunch box, you can smell a stale smell. The school intends to improve students' lunch conditions. This year, free lunch policy, canteen finally opened. Lizzie's uncle divided the canteen into 2 parts, one side as the dining room, the other as the canteen. During class, students often go to the shop to buy small snacks for a few cents. The lady boss always collects money in a locked wooden box to find money. The school distributed 250 yuan to each student's parents, which is a lunch fee for 1 semester. My father gave me money in units of days and let me to buy lunch in the school cafeteria. But not everyone can enjoy this meal like me. Some students who are closer to the family will still be ordered to continue to go home to eat, because it saves money. This year, another transfer student, Wen Mei, came to the class. She had very white skin and long black straight hair. She was the first live-in student in the school. Wen Mei's surname is rare in the local area. I heard that her hometown is in a village that has not yet used the tertiary road. It takes a few hours to walk from the village to the nearest road. Everyone who could walk in the village, including Wen Mei's parents, had gone out to work. The primary school in the village had been removed the previous year, and Wen Mei had to transfer to Qingshan Primary School. The school separated a small room from the teacher's dormitory for Wen Mei to do the dormitory. Her family sent to the pots and chopsticks. After school, she went to the neighborhood to find firewood to cook for herself. After a period of time, Wen Mei and I got to know each other well. When we walked to school, if we saw wood or branches suitable for firewood, we would pick them up to her. One day Wen Mei invited me, "Where are you going to play after lunch? Would you like to come with me to gather firewood at the board factory?" The board factory, she said, is a small wood processing plant near the school. Waste wood is often thrown out and used as firewood by nearby residents to take home. I agreed. Unexpectedly, when we were collecting firewood that day, we met Chunzi and Lizzie. Since Chunzi left the school, she hasn't spoken to us again, as if in deliberately hide the former classmates, never entered the school. Chunzi was so full of strength that she tied the firewood together in a few strokes. Wen Mei was very grateful and said a few words of thank you to her. Chunzi still didn't like to talk, and nodded his head. After that, we got together a lot. The most frequent places are Lizzie's house and Wen Mei's dormitory. One after another, we decided to bundle firewood text, a title, find a time, to the school behind the treasure ground on the sky kneeling down, made a share the good and the bad oath, to become good sister of lifetime. Chunzi was the oldest, the eldest, Wen Mei was the second, I was the third, Lizzie was the youngest, the fourth. It wasn't long before something happened that it became the watershed of our 4 sisters' lives. One day I just arrived at school, the female classmate suddenly excited to get together, did you heard? There are policemen coming to our school, and the shop was stolen. I was taken aback, did not wait for me to ask. The classmates began to talk about the details. The canteen sells snacks over there have been stolen. And the money box, too, had been pried open. But is it strange that the door was locked and have not to pry? This kind of thing rarely happened in the small village, and someone soon shared with me the latest progress. It was done by students, and the food and money were stolen. The thief is probably from the village, or Wen Mei who live in. I was horrified. Lizzie and Wen Mei didn't show up for class that day. After school, I ran to find Wen Mei, but found the door of the dormitory tightly locked. And the door of Lizzie's house was also closed. Chun-Zi couldn't find anyone. The next day, the truth came out. The people who stole the money really is the Lizzie, Chun-Zi and Wen Mei. Lizzie stole the key from her uncle, and Chun-Zi and Wen Mei is an accomplice. Most of the snacks were eaten on the spot by them, and the rest were hidden. The money in the box was equally divided by the three people, and they haven't been spent. Lizzie's motive is very simple. She has no money at home to buy snacks, and the uncle doesn't allow her to eat it, but the classmates around are eating it. Chun-Zi and Wen Mei's situation is about the same. Three people thought of together. Wen Mei left school after the incident, and Lizzie returned to school again because of her uncle. Wen Mei left the school after the incident, Lizzie because of her uncle's relationship, and returned to the school. Soon after this incident, I changed schools and I didn't have time to say goodbye to them. At that time, the county primary school just opened the ethnic class from each rural primary school to recruit excellent students. I was selected. In the elementary school in the county, I first encountered computer and multimedia teaching. With English classes and music lessons, I could borrow books from the library. The students around me were county kids who were completely different from the children in the mountains. They have excellent grades, a cheerful personality, and his own strengths, and even their parents are much gentler. My time back to the village is less and less, and then, I went to the county junior high school, the city high school. Time passed by. I have been looked for several times. Finally I always only can contact with Lizzie, but she refused to see me. Just let me go back. The second year of junior high school, she dropped out of school, because the only grandma who supported chestnuts to go to school passed away unexpectedly. I persuaded her to finish at least junior high school. She only said, "It's useless to study, it's better to come back and help my dad work." In the summer vacation of 2018, after rejecting me many times, Lizzie and I finally met in the town. At that time she was already a mother and had a daughter. I mentioned that when I went back to the village in the summer vacation of my second year in high school, I met the person who looked very much like Chun-Zi. She was holding a child and standing by the roadside with a man who looked much older than her. His clothes were still in rags. She was raped by her father and got pregnant. Her father let people ask Bald, "Do you want?" Bald more than 30 years old to get a wife, how can not to want? Bald with spring sun to the hospital to hit the fetus. She also has children now and is still a son. I don't know what to say. That Bald once was a famous bachelor nearby. The conditions are a little better than Chun-Zi's home. Only have a mouth to eat. I asked about Wen Mei again. Lizzie told me that she also got married. The children were taken by the old people in her hometown. She worked with their husbands in Guangdong. After another year, Lizzie divorced and the daughter left to her ex-husband. She have remarried again. Later I often thought, more than 100 years ago, my ancestors fled into the mountains from the plains to avoid war. Today, escaping from the mountain has become our war with destiny. Obviously, going to school is the only shortcut to victory, but not all children can go to the end on this shortcut. As a survivor, I don't know what I can do for them.